Hello, Judge. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. I'm so excited to talk to you today for what is the first in the Legal Legends series. And when I saw this is our Legal Legends series, I thought you're a legend for a lot of reasons, not just legal. You have been in the practice of law for 76 years.
Right.
That is fantastic. So I wanted to talk to you today and share with everybody else some of the things that you've seen and done and just talk about the fun life you've had. Are you ready to get started?
Ready.
I do have to tell them one thing. You've got a bow tie on with pink and I have a pink jacket. We didn't talk about this before we showed up,
That's true.
but that shows how together we are, doesn't it? So let's talk about you. Where'd you grow up? Where were you born and what
I was
happened?
born in New York City,
Okay.
moved to St. Louis, and when I was 16, during the Depression, when my dad got a job here,
Yeah.
and went to finish high school here at University City High School. From there, I went to Washington University and got 2 degrees. I got a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in history.
Wow.
And from there, I decided to go to law school. I went to Harvard Law School and graduated in 1947.
All right. Well, let's go back to before you graduated. I guess where your age fit, World War II was happening when you were in college.
Correct.
Okay. And so they took 18-year-olds. You were a little too above that, or because you were in college, you didn't
A
get.
little older.
Okay.
They didn't take me because I had very poor eyesight,
Yeah.
but mainly because I had a hearing problem.
Is that right?
And when I went for my physical, the head of the otolaryngology department, WashU, checked me out and tested my hearing. Of course, this is long before they had hearing aids.
Right.
And he said, son, if the Army took you, the first day an artillery shell will go off near you, you become totally deaf.
Oh.
He said, glasses, we can take care of that. But you'll be no use in the Army, and they'll have to pay you a pension. He said, I understand you go to college. I said, yes, sir. He said, we'll go home, finish your college, and do something, make something of yourself. I went home and I walked in the door after taking 2 buses and a streetcar to Jefferson Barracks for my exam. And I had an older brother who was in the Air Force in the Pacific at the time. And I walked in the door and my mother said, what happened? In those days, that was the last good war.
Yeah.
I was crying that they wouldn't take me.
I bet.
And I said, they won't take me. And she said, thank God.
She did. She was
That was
happy.
it. So I continued. And
So he told you to go to college and finish that up and make something of yourself.
right,
You took that to heart.
yeah,
Let's talk about that. So you were at WashU and you graduated and went to Harvard for
right.
law school. All right. So tell me, I guess you remember some about New York when you lived there.
A little.
But back then it had to be pretty hard, not as easy as it is now, to get to Boston to go to Harvard.
Went primarily by train.
Is that it?
Airlines were just getting started.
Yeah.
During the war, almost non-existent.
Yeah.
And it took a train from St. Louis to Boston, took about 20 hours.
Wow.
And that was life. You never thought about it.
That's neat. Well, the fact that you went to Harvard in 1944 is pretty cool. Tell me this. What was it like? Were the classes pretty good size, or how many people?
No, we were the last small class.
You
So
were.
a lot of the guys went to the service.
Yeah.
But no women.
No women.
Women were not admitted until about 9 years after I got through.
Okay.
We had a number of blacks,
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
One of my classmates had been the governor of the Virgin Islands.
Really? And came here to go to Harvard Law School.
Right.
How many people were in your class? Was it 100 or less than that?
I think we started with about 132,
Okay,
of which 62
wow,
finished.
wow. So they would weed them out back at that time.
They said about a third would drop out.
Oh,
But normally their class is about 500 or so.
oh, wow.
And of course, they use the Socratic method at Harvard, many law schools did. I never knew what the heck the Socratic method was.
You just answered the question.
We had classmates from all over the country, all over the world. As a
Yeah,
matter of fact.
yeah.
One of my good friends went from Nigeria. Anyway, we thought they were talking Greek. One was a Rhodes Scholar, an MD,
Wow.
and we couldn't figure out what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
And we had some giants that taught us. Roscoe
bet you
Pound,
did.
for example,
Oh, is that right? Roscoe Pound was one of your professors.
was one of my professors.
That's
He had been
incredible.
retired from being the dean for
Yeah.
many years.
Yeah.
He had an interesting background. He came from Nebraska. And when he became a lawyer, they wanted to put him on the Nebraska Supreme Court. But they couldn't take him because you had to be 30 and he was only 29. So they created a new position called a commissioner, which we had in Missouri
Yeah.
for 3 years. Thereafter, he came to Harvard, started to teach there. Not only was he a giant in the law field, he was a world-renowned botanist.
Botanist.
Yes.
I did not know that. I mean, I don't know that any of us would have heard that.
He was world famous in botany. And in 1949, after he retired from law school, designed a legal system for the nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek.
Really? Oh, that's incredible.
He had
Gosh,
a phenomenal memory. The story is told about in the 1930s, after the exams in June, he took a boat to England to teach there for the summer. And he got a cablegram saying you forgot to turn in the exam result. In those days, the both law firms did, law schools did. He had one exam at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it would all be hand graded.
Right. He had like 485 papers. He had already graded them but didn't turn them in. So from memory, he cabled back what he remembered the grades he gave. Out of the 400 and some odd, he missed by 4.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
What I remember.
Yeah, that is a memory.
Yeah.
That would help you be an expert in both botany and the law. Who else did you meet at Harvard?
Austin Westman Scott taught trust. He wrote a treatise called Scott on Trust.
Okay.
Sam Willison
Yeah.
on contract.
Yeah, yeah.
Who was there, but was not teaching when I was there. Archie Cox.
Archibald Cox. Yeah.
Who later became one of the participants in the Saturday Night Massacre during the Watergate. And he was there with a couple of my classmates, Elliot Richardson, and Jim St. Clair, Warren Seavey, Zechariah Chafee, who was an expert on the First Amendment. James Kastner, who was an expert in probate law. James McLaughlin, who helped write the Bankruptcy Act in 1938. And I guess I can tell you that at the end of the class, at the end of the year,
Yeah.
well, during the year, each professor was supposed to tell one joke during the semester.
Okay.
McLaughlin,
They were given one.
only one. McLaughlin would tell the story about the American who was invited to go fox hunting in England.
Uh-huh.
And he was on his horse and ready to go, and he said to his who was the head of it, he said, you know, I've never been this before, but what do I do if I see the fox? He's very simple, young man. Just yell tally ho, and we'll come and fetch the fox. Well, they're riding, and who sees the fox? The American. He got so flustered, he couldn't remember what to say, and said, there goes the son of a bitch. On the last day of class, the professor gets ready to walk out of the lecture hall. With the tradition, all the students stood up and applauded.
Clap for
And
him.
they did that for McLaughlin. And as he passed by me, somebody yelled out, tally ho.
That's hilarious. That's good. That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
I understand you graduated with Sumner Redstone too.
Sumner Redstone was not very distinguished.
I was gonna ask. That's funny.
He became a multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
And, you know, every year, Harvard Law School, as most schools do, try to raise money from the alumni. And one year, not too long ago, he since passed away, but my class, if there were very few of us left at that, was $5,010,100.
Oh, my goodness.
Redstone donated $5 million.
Oh, okay.
One of my other classmates donated $10,000, and I gave the 100.
That is perfect. Well, all you really need to tell people is, Redstone and this other guy and I, we funded that $5 million gift, because that's true. It's true.
Right.
Okay, so then you graduated in 47.
Correct.
Did you go to graduation? What happened? How was graduation?
Well, I missed the law school graduation because I hadn't been home in almost a year. And the featured speaker was General Marshall, who came out with the Marshall Plan,
Yeah,
which helped save Europe.
yeah.
And I missed it.
That's too bad. That's too bad. You could read about it later.
Right.
So you came back to St. Louis. That was a blessing for St. Louis.
Well, yeah, I came back to St. Louis. Meanwhile, I was offered a job with a big firm in New York. And they told me they would accept me. And I said, tell me what would happen if I came with your firm.
Yeah,
Well, about the first 5 years, you'd be in the library
yeah,
doing research.
yeah.
I said, when do I see a courtroom? After about 5 years. And I said, thank you, but no thank you. And I came back to St.
Good
Louis.
for you. Good for you. And so you took the bar here. I guess they gave the bar.
I took the bar exam.
Was it 2 days or just 1 day back
Took
then?
2 days.
Two
We
days.
used to take it in the House of Representatives in Jeff City. In those
Oh,
days.
that would have been fancy. Oh,
And,
doggone.
all I know is there are no bar courses in those days. And the first time I took it, I passed it. Why? How? I don't know, because I knew very little, if not nothing, about Missouri law.
Right, right.
And when I graduated, I took a position with a small firm in St. Louis named Boyle, Priest, and Elliott.
Okay.
In those days, there were no large firms.
No, there weren't, were they? People didn't have big, large.
Thompson Mitchell later became Thompson Coburn.
Yeah.
Had maybe 6 or 7 lawyers.
Wow.
Brian Cave, was called Brian Cave, McFeeters, and McRoberts.
That's right. I remember
They
it.
only had about maybe 8 or 10. A lot of times, most lawyers practice on their own. but a lot of them got together in a suite and shared expenses and called themselves a firm, but they're really.
Oh, I got it. They just shared space and made a name.
Right.
Interesting.
Now,
So what kind of work did you do? What kind of work did you do in your new firm?
well, like most lawyers, when I was with this firm, the first time I ever saw a courtroom was the Missouri Supreme Court. I'd been out of law school maybe 6 months, and I argued 3 cases in front of the Missouri
Are
Supreme
you
Court.
kidding?
Won 2 and lost 1.
That's fantastic.
I was predicted I would lose 2 and win 1, but I still remember some of the names of the cases I had. And to me, it was like an extension of law school.
Yeah.
And let me tell you about the practice of law in those days.
Yeah. What was it like?
It was very rudimentary. What I call 19th century is.
Really?
Well, imagine no computers,
Right.
no iPhones,
Just books.
no copiers, no paralegal. Everybody did their own research. There were very few specialists. If you wanted to try a case in the city of St. Louis, for example, all you needed was a manual typewriter, carbon paper, and $14 for a filing fee.
$14 was the filing fee. I'll be doggone.
And in the city of St. Louis was the hub of the legal profession.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
Circuit judges in the city were the only ones under the nonpartisan court plan. Before that, they were all elected.
Yeah, Judge, I'm surprised to hear that early that we had the nonpartisan.
Right.
That must be why it's named
the
the
in
Missouri plan.
1936.
Wow.
Didn't come into the county until 1970.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a judge in St. Louis County, you run on a party label. I did in 1968.
Yeah.
And I had 3 opponents in the primary. I won, and I lost in the general election because in those days, one party would sweep in the election and drag everybody with them.
Oh, I got it.
And so forth.
Yeah.
In the city of St. Louis had an interesting legal setup. Circuit court was in the civil court building. The criminal courts were criminal court building at 14th and Market Street.
Yeah.
And of course, the federal building was on what they call 12th Court Street in the civil court building.
Now the Carnahan building. I guess they call it the Carnahan building now.
Right. And, there were in the criminal field, there was a circuit attorney that handled felonies and a prosecuting attorney that handled nothing but misdemeanors. And when I started practice, the prosecuting attorney was Tom Shannon, who was Mike Shannon's father.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
I did not realize his dad was a lawyer,
And
much less a prosecutor.
misdemeanors had their own court name
Who?
called the Court of Criminal Correction. We call it the 3 C's, located at 12th and Clark, across from the city hall and the police department.
Okay, right in that
They
area.
had 2 judges. The right on the party label, you're nothing but misdemeanors.
Okay.
And then on 12th Street, the federal in the criminal court building, you also had the sitting court. We used to call them the police court to hear ordinance violations.
Okay.
So lawyers in those days had to do a lot of walking.
Yeah.
If you had an office in downtown St. Louis, you walked to the civil court building, to the federal court building,
Yeah.
to 14th Street, to the 3 C's. Very rarely did anybody have any litigation in St. Louis County. It was like a rural county in those days.
Wow.
They had their own bar, maybe a couple of dozen lawyers in Clayton, and all had 4 circuit judges, all Republicans, all ran on the party label.
Really?
And before 1979, when the initial article was adopted, magistrates, who are now called associate
Yeah.
circuit
Yeah.
judges, were elected on party label all over.
Okay.
The city, they were quartered in the civil courts building. In the county, they were all over the county in rental quarters. North County, Central County, South County, and so forth.
Okay.
Right.
So spread out kind of evenly.
Spread out, right. They had 2 in the Clayton in rented quarters. And trials were very rudimentary. When you were trying a civil case in St. Louis or anywhere in Missouri, no MAI.
Oh, I guess that's right.
You had to make up your own instructions.
Wow.
At one time, I was requested by the Bar Association with another lawyer to check something. In those days, we had the St. Louis Court of Appeals, which is now the Eastern District. We found that civil cases on appeal, 40% were reversed because of faulty instructions.
Really?
So it was shooting crap
Yeah. Just
to get a one that would be approved by the court. Missouri had in those days what they called the rule of uniformity. Supreme Court had a rule that no civil judgment would be approved unless it was in line with the rule of previous cases.
okay. So there had to be some sort of precedent. Or it wouldn't be approved. Okay.
If you had a case, for example, in the wrongful death statute, when I started practice was only 5,000. Then it went to 10,000.
Really?
Then it went to 50,000.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And if you had a judgment, say, for 10,000 for wrongful death,
Right.
and you got a verdict of, say, 15,000, they would cut it to 10 under the rule of uniformity. Crazy,
Wow.
crazy.
When did they do away with the cap? Because we've never had a cap since I started, and I started practicing in '88.
Yeah, they took the cap away, I think, in the late 60s.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it came about because there was a lawyer that worked for Thompson Mitchell, who became general counsel of McDonnell Aircraft.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he was driving along Lindbergh one day, and they didn't have any barrier, and someone came across the hidden lane and killed him.
Oh.
And his wrongful death case, his life was only worth in those days 50,000. And that was the impetus for the General Assembly to wipe out the cap.
Yes, that makes sense. Because of him. That makes sense.
In those days, if you tried a case, civil case, you got one figure. It includes your medical, your lost wages,
Yeah.
everything,
Anything.
all in one figure. You never broke it down. We had contributory fault
Yeah. That's right.
or contributory negligence.
Right.
So, the trials didn't take long. Some lawyers tried 2 and 3 cases a week.
That's what I've heard. How could they do that? Why were they so much shorter?
You pick a jury, maybe an hour.
Oh. Didn't go through all the detail we do now.
You'd have the plaintiff, 1 or 2 witnesses testify, medical maybe. It would go to the jury either that afternoon or the next day. You didn't worry about instructions. And the arguments were 20 minutes, a half hour.
Got it.
In rare exceptions, maybe an hour.
Yeah.
very few. The one thing about the law practice in those days, lawyers almost never lied to one another.
I was going to ask you about how people got along.
The ones that did were you count on one hand, and word would get around. The lawyers' word was in bond. If you and I met on the street, and I said, "Hey, we got this case coming up next week. What do you think we settle it?" And we would settle it right there on the street corner.
Right.
And nothing in writing.
Right.
And never had a problem.
What changed, Judge? What do you think? Do you look back and think, this is when that I guess the opinions of lawyers went down? Was it Watergate?
What changed? I'm not sure. Of course, a lot more lawyers came on the scene.
That's true. A lot of competition.
Right. And with very little experience. And by the way, in those days, we would communicate by telephone or red letters.
Right.
I remember I once had a case with Morris Sandler.
Yeah, sure.
A giant criminal lawyer.
Yeah.
But
Well
I defended
renowned.
the case and agreed to pay his client a certain amount of money. And I got a letter from him. Morris was noted for brevity in letters. He wrote, "Dear sir, enclosed fine executed release, period. Then check, period."
And you sent the check, and that was the end of that. Isn't that funny? Judge, you mentioned
if
you
want
had
to take a deposition, you call the other lawyer and say, "How about next Thursday at 1 o'clock?"
Yeah.
And that was it.
You didn't have to call 7 people, get it set up, then you just
Right. And depositions were fairly short.
yeah.
Doctors would often testify live in court, which is a lot different.
Totally different now. Technology has changed that.
Right. And the technology was rudimentary.
Oh, sure.
No DNA, no MRI, no CAT scan. Matter of fact, when I was on the bench, I had the first CAT scan case.
You did.
The manufacturer, I think from Belgium, manufactured something called CT scan. And I didn't know what that was. They told me it's a fancy X-ray. Okay. And Barnes Jewish was being sued for not paying the bill, about $600,000. And their defense was it was faulty. And we tried it in front of a jury. And in the second day of trial, I settled it. And that's how we found out there was such a thing as a CAT
That's
scan.
how you found out. That is so funny.
Right.
Tell me, what was the year you went on the bench?
I went on the bench in 1975 and I retired in 1983.
Okay, before we get to the bench, let me ask you this. Looking back from 75 to 47, how through the first decades that you practiced in, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, how could you see the law, not the law, but the legal practice changing?
It was slow changing. The technical advances complicated the trial. The Supreme Court of Missouri, which handled direct appeal more than they do today.
Yeah.
We had the St. Louis Court of Appeal. It did most of the work, and very few appeals went to the Supreme Court.
Right.
But
that's a big change.
That was a big change. Lawyers on appeal had to write briefs and had to be published. Went to a publishing company to print your brief. The Supreme Court had 2 divisions, 1 and 2, and they heard a lot of cases. not on paper, but direct. The say technology advanced.
That was a big change.
That was a
wasn't
big
it?
change.
Big
And
change.
then when they changed the judicial article, for example, in domestic relations cases, up until 1979, judges had nothing to do with property.
What?
You're on your own if you want to divide the property,
Well, okay, so let's say we were married and we were getting a divorce. Who kept the house?
right?
You figured it out on your own?
The court only provided for whether there was a divorce, child custody, maintenance,
Yeah,
attorney's fees. That was it.
maybe child support.
That was it.
Was support paid or not?
Right.
Yeah.
Support.
Okay, that's
And,
it.
The court had nothing to do with property, so divorce cases took almost no time.
That's
There were a lot of
crazy.
non-contested divorce.
How do you get the divided property? You just figure it out.
You're on your own.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Sometimes equity suits were filed,
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I can see that.
or there's self-help.
Wow, that is it. That is amazing. All right, so you did everything. You did probate, criminal, family, civil, all sorts of
Right.
cases.
All
It-
kinds of matters that you never heard of today. For
I
example,
bet equity, all sorts of ones.
I had a case involving dower right.
I've heard of that, but I can't remember what it is.
The support of a widow.
Like a
who
dowry.
died without a will,
Okay,
and how much money went to the wife. This was 19th century.
oh, 19th
Actually
century
had
law.
one.
I'll be doggone.
As I said, instructions were rudimentary.
Yeah.
They
If-
weren't
If
complicated.
you had to start over today you were entering the practice, knowing what you do about those areas, criminal and probate and civil and family, what would you have picked if you were going to specialize?
Well, there were very few specialists in those days.
Yeah,
You handled a case,
you did it all.
you did it all. Whatever
I
came in.
like that. I like that notion of doing it all.
Right, and the thing that really developed it was taxation.
Oh,
together.
gosh.
Experts in taxation. Patent law starting to come in. The paralegals starting to come in.
Yeah,
Give you an example. People didn't have iPhones. If you tried a case and the jury came in, you'd want to call your office and tell them what happened, right? You'd run out in the hall and look for a payphone.
I guess that's right. That's right.
Right,
You didn't have an iPhone. You
right.
couldn't text
right,
people.
right. And when I was presiding judge, I got the Bar Association to sponsor a lounge in my conference room and put up 2 telephones for use in the bar.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And lawyers would
That
go
was
and they'd
brilliant.
come running in and use that.
Well, let's move to you being a judge. Did you run or were you appointed?
I was appointed.
You were. So by that time,
It was nonpartisan.
nonpartisan. Okay. So let's talk about that. So you served from 75 to 90, what? 95, 93?
Industry.
It's crazy. That's a long, I mean, and you had a good full career
Yeah,
before you got on the bench.
yeah.
So
Right.
that's good. So tell me, as you look back as a judge, what do you think your greatest accomplishment was? Getting those phones for those attorneys, I'm sure it was a practical one.
Well, I never thought I did anything spectacular.
Well, you did.
Uh,
Whether you thought it or not, you did a lot of spectacular things.
as a judge, I handled almost everything. From murder,
You did.
I actually had one murder that was executed. I tried a murder case under a death threat. Civil cases, I had almost any kind you could think of,
Everything.
everything. We had in the St. Louis County, 1 week would be a civil jury trial, 1 week in criminal jury trials, 1 week in equity,
Okay,
and 1 week in domestic relations.
okay, wow.
And so you handle a whole coterie of it, almost anything.
Yeah,
You name it, I think I've tried it.
you knew it. I like that. That made the best judges, didn't it? Those made good judges.
And by and large, trial lawyers, before they were known as litigators.
Yeah.
We call them trial
Trial
lawyers.
lawyers.
We had quite a good group of lawyers. The average lawyer was expected to try his own case. And I'm talking about, you get a fender bender case. But if you had a real big one, they would hire someone that had the expertise,
Yeah, yeah,
which I guess they still do.
I guess so. Yeah,
But,
depending on what the area is.
Yeah, the average lawyer had office practice, a lot of corporate work,
Yeah,
probate work. And incidentally, we had separate probate judges, one in the county, one in the city.
you did.
And they had hearings, handle all the technical aspect of trying case, portioning out the probate work.
Yeah,
And the average lawyer had their own probate practice.
huh,
Nothing was real complicated in those days.
yeah.
Very few trusts set up.
So Judge, when yeah, there really weren't trusts back then, were there? I mean,
Right.
you didn't know about. Judge, would you say as a lawyer and as a judge, most of your friends were lawyers?
Yes,
You like lawyers?
lawyers and judges.
I do too. I like lawyers. So they're my friends too. Some people don't like working with, or they'll fine with working with lawyers, but they don't like being friends with lawyers. I find lawyers are good friends.
Right.
So
Okay,
how was it when you transferred from the practice to a judge? You kept the same friends?
Well, as I said the day I was sworn in, I'm like a ref, an umpire in a baseball game.
That's right.
I'm a ball player one day, the next day I'm behind the plate, calling balls and strikes. You had to be even-handed, so forth. And the judge is dependent on your experience, your training, your outlook. Try to give a call it as you see it, like an umpire does. And a lot of lawyers became experts in the cases they handled.
Right.
I remember one time I had a case involving severe eye injury. And I took a deposition of an eye doctor, an expert. And during it, he said, "Young man, that last question you asked me, you know more about that part than I do."
Did he really?
Yeah, because
That's a compliment.
lawyers became experts in the
You
cases they
do.
had.
You do. You may lose it later, but you
Right.
gotta know it then.
Right, right.
What was the hardest as a trial judge? What was the hardest thing or some of the most significant challenges you personally faced?
Well, and most judges will tell you, I dislike hearing domestic relations cases.
Yeah,
And the hardest thing I had to do was decide child custody.
hard.
I recall I had one case that really bothered me. A young couple had nothing except the most beautiful 3-year-old daughter I've ever seen. Could have been a movie star. Blonde curls,
Oh,
beautiful, like Shirley Temple.
right. That's what I was thinking.
And they both wanted custody. The problem was mother was a convicted prostitute
Oh, no.
and father was a convicted drug dealer. And what do you do with the kid?
You can't give them to somebody else. That's what you want to do.
The easiest thing to do is give it to foster care. And it bothered me so. A few days later, while I was taking a shower, I remember testimony of the wife testifying. She got along with her mother-in-law better than her own mother, who was an alcoholic. And she was babysit for the baby. I contacted the lawyer, got the father, mother come into court, subject herself to the jurisdiction of the court.
Right.
And after checking up on him, I gave the baby to the grandmother with the right to the mother and father to see the child at regular time and so forth. And I monitored that for a year and it worked out.
Really, that's wonderful. It worked out for the baby.
Right.
That's the main
Had a
thing.
family.
That's exactly right. It had both parents in its life.
Right, right.
That's wonderful in her life.
Yeah. One thing, as a judge, you had to keep you cool when something untoward happened. Usually during criminal cases,
I'm not good
people
at
would
that.
act up in court and so forth and so on.
Yeah,
Uh,
hollering and yelling and
yeah. But the usual routine of cases, you came to know the lawyer and what their proclivities were. And so
right,
forth.
right.
Very, very few times that I ever had a problem with a lawyer.
That's good.
I never held a lawyer in contempt. I came close once for lying to the court.
Well, that's a problem.
Yeah. But the lawyers knew what their boundaries were and so forth and so on.
That shows though, Judge, you kept a good court.
Right.
You know, you kept a rule on things.
When I started practice, jurors were summoned and sat all week. So if you had a case that very seldom would go out to trial on a Wednesday, usually Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah.
And if you had something on a Wednesday, you got the rejects from the rest of the week. The juror pool wasn't all that good. So the court appointed me in 1976, after we got a grant from Uncle Sam, to study the jury system throughout the country. In those days, one day, one trial system had started in Texas. And I traveled around and looked at the jury system throughout the country. And we decided to go to the 2-day one trial system, which still exists. If a juror was not sent out on a trial on a Tuesday, they were let go. On Wednesday, we got a new panel. So after we had a first pool, I remember one week I tried 3 jury trials in a week. 2 rape cases and a medical malpractice starting from Monday through Saturday.
Yeah, yeah.
I had no compunction of having a jury sit well into the night.
Well, I'm tickled because you said you had a trial on Saturday. You and I may be the only two I know that had a trial on Saturday. We had a trial, it started Thursday. It was weird. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Monday.
Right.
But
the jury
didn't care. They wanted to come back.
Usually in a criminal case, locked up.
Yeah.
We let them go out on a Friday night and bring them in for a Saturday. Incidentally, I found out I once had a murder case and we got through trying it all week, including Saturday. And I got a note from the jury saying, it's now 9 o'clock on a Saturday. Can we come back tomorrow? And the lawyer said, sure, that's no problem. I said, wait a minute. In the back of my mind, I recall an old law in Missouri. You cannot hold court on a Sunday.
I didn't know that.
So I asked the lawyer to see if they could find some law. Well, they woke up the prosecuting attorney. They checked it. Anyway, Saturday they came back and said, we can't find anything. I said, "Do you look at the digest under Sunday?"
Come on.
No. And I pulled it, there it was. You can't hold court on a Sunday, but you can receive a verdict.
Oh, perfect. No evidence on a Sunday.
Right.
I did.
So-
Is that still the law?
So this one case, I had the jury come back Sunday morning. They came in within an hour with the verdict.
Wow.
Yeah.
They thought about it
As
overnight.
far as I know, it's still a law.
That is so much fun. All right. I want to ask you one more question about back then, and then I want to come to what you're doing now. How was your experience working with judges when you were a judge?
I had no problem.
Good. Had a good group at the
We
time.
had all kinds of personalities. Where some judges were lazy. Some would hear cases and not be able to make their minds up.
Yeah.
Supreme Court removed several of them.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. We had one judge, Paul Corning, in the 70s. Good guy, good lawyer, good judge. They couldn't decide anything.
Yeah.
He'd have cases under submission for up to 2 years.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court finally removed him.
You know, it's one thing to be a lawyer and not be able to make your mind up because you see both sides and you have to be an advocate so you can put that hat on. But to be a judge, you got to be able to be decisive.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Well, tell us about now. So I know that you are still writing and reading and publishing. So tell me about what you've been doing for the St. Louis Bar Journal for the last
Well,
several years.
57th year
Is it your 57th?
writing book reviews. for
That
the Bar
is
Journal.
incredible. So tell me what you do. So St. Louis Bar Journal, which is the Bamsel publication.
Right.
You write a book review
Right.
and put that in, what is it, once a month?
No, it comes out 4 times a year.
Quarterly. I couldn't remember.
And they let me review any kind of book I
I
wanted.
was just gonna ask, is it just legal
I didn't
related?
do real technical stuff you see in a bar review.
Yeah,
Mostly novels,
yeah,
books about the law, about courts, about the Supreme Court and
Yeah.
so forth and so on. In fact, I did one not long ago about the trial of Jack Ruby.
oh, sure,
Jack Ruby was the killer who killed the killer of the president of the United
that's
States.
right, that's right.
And he was tried in Dallas County, Texas. And the case was tried by the prosecuting attorney of Dallas named Henry Wade.
Henry Wade. And didn't Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald through some sort of underground passageway? I remember
Yeah.
seeing the detail, but I can't remember. Okay, so a lot of witnesses.
Well, let me just say there, I mentioned Henry Wade specifically.
Tell me
Why?
about Henry Wade, yeah.
Because Henry Wade later on became famous in a federal case called Roe versus Wade.
Are you kidding?
The same guy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So the guy who prosecuted Jack Ruby is the Wade from Roe versus
Right.
Wade. Wow, that's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. During the Jack Ruby
Yeah.
case, they tried in the courthouse in Dallas, on like the 15th floor. I
Yeah,
think of it,
yeah.
where they had the court. And above that was the county jail. There was a break when the president broke out of jail. And I Peter Ruth, one of them took a bar of soap and shoe polish on it, making it look like a pistol. And they held it, and about 6 of them walked out of jail. Instead of taking an elevator, they walked down the steps, walked through the hall where the Ruby case was being held, and walked out of the courthouse. They were captured. When they walked through the hall where the trial was being held, the wife of Ruby's lawyer, who Melvin Belli. Well,
Oh, I know Melvin Belli, sure.
his wife was in the hall interviewing a witness, and they walked right by him. No police were there at the time.
Yeah.
And I did one not too long ago about the trial of the state of Alabama versus Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was a young preacher who moved to Alabama, practically unknown, but helped put on a strike against the bus company. And that put him in a national notoriety.
Yeah.
And speaking of him, I once met his father,
Tell me about that.
Dr. Martin Luther King
Senior, I didn't, yeah,
The most
I assumed there
amazing
was.
man I ever met.
Are you kidding? Tell me about him. How did, first, who is he? I mean, and what, I mean, I know.
He was not like his son, he was taller,
He
had
was.
a deeper voice. I belonged to a group of lawyers throughout the country. Was organized by Judge Tom Clark in the Supreme Court years ago, who realized that judges in large cities had problems that they didn't have in rural communities. And I was on a conference seminar in Atlanta, and a lawyer in Atlanta got Dr. King Sr., who then retired,
Yeah.
come and do the invocation. And we got through, I, like several others, got in line to meet him. And I thought I shook hands and leave. Shook hands with him. He said, "Young man, don't run off. Tell me about yourself."
Did he really?
He said, "Do you have a family?" I said, "Yes, this is my wife," introduced my wife. "You have children? You're a lawyer, aren't you? Where are you from, sir?" I said, "St. Louis." "You know, I've been in St. Louis." It went on and on and on. And just as warm and friendly as you can.
I'll be
I'm
doggone.
probably one of the few people west of the Mississippi that ever met him.
Yeah.
They called him Daddy King.
Daddy King. I love that.
Yeah,
Very charismatic, it sounds like.
right.
And who else can you think of through the years that you've met that were interesting?
Yeah. I met President Truman on two occasions.
You did.
Truman was out of office,
Okay.
didn't like to fly. And when he lived in Kansas City, he'd take a train, go either in Washington or New York, see his grandkids. There'd always be a stopover in St. Louis. And several hours delay. And we would have lunch at the old Sadler Hotel. They had a great restaurant called the Red Room, Cafe Room. And senior partner of the firm I was with occasionally would take me to lunch there. And one time we're having lunch, all of a sudden I hear a buzz of people. And we turn around. There in the back of the table was President Truman and Mrs.
Oh,
Truman
doggone.
and a Secret Service man. And people would come over to him.
Yeah.
"Mr. President, would you sign it?" Finally, he started to walk out. He walked by our table. Senior head of our firm, Chapman at the time, knew him when he was senator in Missouri.
I'll be doggone.
When you address somebody that had notoriety, you address them by the highest office they ever had.
Right.
When Truman came by, he said hello. Chapman stood up and said, "Hello, Senator."
Senator. Instead of Mr.
I mean,
President.
Mr. President. He said, "All right, we'll go back a long way. I want you to meet my young associate, Arthur Litz." And I stood up. He said, "How are you, young man?" I said, "Fine." Anyway, about a year later, the same thing happened. He's back. This time he came over, grabbed my arm, and he said, "Young man, is he taking good care of you?"
Is that what
I
it
said,
said?
"Yes, sir, Mr. President, thank you."
That is neat.
Now,
That's funny.
just the way you picture him in a picture, in movie and so forth. No breath of grace to be
Yeah.
5 foot
Do you
stuff.
have his hat on?
Just as friendly as he could be.
That's good.
And
You told me earlier before we started today that you got a letter recently from President Biden
correct.
congratulating you. It was a nice letter on what a difference you've made in this world and your generation has made. Have you met any Supreme Court members?
Yes. Matter of fact, I probably wanted to see trial judges. They had a future Supreme Court judge try a case before you.
Really?
Clarence Thomas.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
Well, at that time, the Assistant Attorney General of Missouri just graduated from law school. And Jack Danforth, who was the Attorney General, hired
Sure.
him.
Yeah.
And I had a case involving the assessment of real estate in St. Louis County, and he represented the state tax commission. And as a result of that case, got to know him fairly well. I would like him, the young lawyer. And there was an incident a few years after the case was over. He called me one day. And he said, I'm coming into St. Louis. I'd like to talk to you about a personal matter. I said, fine. Clarence, come on in. Came in, I took him to lunch. He said, I've got an offer to go with to be a lawyer in Monsanto. His forte was taxes.
Okay.
And I wanted I don't know many people, your opinion if I should take the job. I said, Clarence, before I answer that, I'm going to ask you one question. You want to spend the rest of your career in Jefferson City? He said, thank you, I know what the answer is. He said, by the way, if I move to St. Louis, where's a good place to live? I said, Clayton. He bought a house in Clayton.
Did he really?
A good school district, sent his kids to the Clayton school.
Yeah.
And anyway, he took the job at the Monsanto. Next thing I know, he's in Washington at the EEOC. And when Thurgood Marshall, incidentally, I met Thurgood Marshall.
Oh, you did? Oh, I love
Yeah.
Thurgood Marshall.
This is 1955, a year after Brown versus the Board of Education.
Sure. Wow.
I was a young lawyer. I was in New York for one day on business. And that night, I went, of course, by myself to a steak restaurant in Manhattan. And I look around, and about 10 feet away from me, and there was Thurgood Marshall with his wife and mother having dinner. And being a brash young lawyer from St. Louis, I walked up to him. I said, Mr. Marshall, I don't want to interrupt you. Please excuse me, but I want to come and congratulate you on the Brown case. He was very nice of you, young man. Thank you. This is my mother and my wife.
Introduced.
Yes, he's very charming. Anyway, when he was on the bench and he passed away, there was an opening on the bench. And President Bush the first to make the appointment. And I wrote a letter to him recommending Clarence, thinking that would be a black sheep.
Right.
And anyway, I didn't think much of it. And when Thomas was nominated and had the Senate hearing, I got a phone call from the White House. Young lawyer said, I want your permission to show your letter to the president, the members of the Senate. I said, by the way, how do things look? And he said, we're cautiously optimistic.
That's a good way to put
And we
it.
know the rest of it.
Right. We know the rest of the story.
I also met Justice Kagan, who at the time I met her, she was the dean of the Harvard Law School. I went back there for a reunion. A very charming lady.
All right, Judge, we're getting the wind up time, but let me just tell you this. We spent some time talking about people that I don't know whether I'm going to call them influential people or important people, but I got to tell you, you're at the top of that list. And it has been a pleasure to follow, not really follow in your footsteps, because I haven't had any of the success you have, but at least I get to read your book reviews. I at least get to still learn from you every time I see a BAMSL publication. And I have had a blast today. I would like to keep you going 3 hours, but it's only a 1 hour CLE. So I'll just thank you very much for being here and say, if there's anything else that we didn't get to cover today that you would like the listeners to know, whether that is about the guiding principle in your life or anything you think a judge has to have, let's end on that. You tell them that or tell me that, and then we'll end our session today.
Well, I was happy to serve with my clients when I was a lawyer on the bench. I tried to do the best I could, give everyone a fair trial. I would treat lawyers and litigants alike fairly. I was happy to see that Blacks and women that come into the profession and went on the bench. And many fine women lawyers today that we didn't have in my day, which I was happy to see. I hope that lawyers today become more civil to one another, use their knowledge and training, serve, after all, we're serving the public. And
that's a good point.
And you do the best you can, and you'll have a good life. And I was so happy, and I was happy to be here today.
Well, thank
so
you
much.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.